So it is my pleasure to be here today with Mo. Mo and I have been mutuals on Twitter for years, and Mo's a wonderful leftist on Twitter, and Mo's been covering and talking a lot about the protests going on in Iran right now. Mo, thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. Look, I really appreciate it.
So can you start by just for viewers that may not have been paying much attention to what's been going on in Iran lately, can you talk about what happened with Mahsa Amini here and how that has sparked some turmoil?
Yeah, sure. The most recent round of protests started around mid-September. So on September 13th, Mahsa Amini, who was traveling from the province of Kurdistan in Iran to Tehran, was arrested by the mortality police, the so-called mortality police. And they're the ones who like enforce a dress code on women inside Iran. And there are eyewitnesses who say she was beaten inside the police van. And once she was eventually taken to the hospital, she was pronounced brain dead on arrival. She entered a coma, and a few days later she passed away. Ever since that news broke out, there have been protests all over Iran, so in all 31 provinces. And for those who don't know, provinces are to Iran what like states are to the United States. So 50 states in here, we have 31 provinces in Iran. And these have been the most widely spread protests since ever, honestly. The last thing that comes close to it was the 2009 protests. Even that wasn't this widely spread and didn't go for as long as this has gone.
And the some of the videos and images that we've seen coming out of Iran and as a result of this have been quite astounding. Burning of headscarves and things like this, and chanting, and met by some brutality from the authorities. Can you talk about what those protests have looked like?
Absolutely. So yeah, the Iranian women and Iranian protesters in general have been organizing all these protests completely people powered and grassroots. And the way they've been going at it is in a few different ways. So these protests broke out organically, and these people have been met with violent oppression, violent beatings. The police have been shooting directly at these protesters. There have been reports of official deaths is like around 94, I think, but official deaths are always only a fracture of the real number of deaths. And among those who have died are so many teenagers. Um, Honestly, just remind me to go into that because there's been two heartbreaking stories that came out yesterday and today about that. And however, I will say none of that has in the slightest discourage the Iranian protesters from going out. They are still going out every day. We are in the third week of the protest now. They are going out knowing that the best case scenario, they will just get arrested or beaten. They know they are going out and they are going to be facing bullets. They are going out regardless because they know and they've accepted that they just don't want to live under this oppressive theocratic regime that has been killing them slowly for years anyway. These protests after Mahsa Amini's death weren't a reactionary movement just coming out of because of Mahsa Amini's death. Mahsa Amini's death was basically the straw that broke the camel's back. Um, there have been protests in Iran for years, especially workers' protests. These past couple of years, there have been so many strikes, so many protests by workers because they are not being able to pay, they are working basically like kind of like here. They are living, they are working like more than 40 hours a week. They have two, three jobs and they can't pay basic basic shit like food, rent, any of that.
Mhm.
And the morality police has been also there since mid 2000s, and they've been arresting women, beating them up for not wearing their hijab scarf properly, for just showing like a little bit too much arm or too much ankle,
Mhm.
since like mid 2000s. So all of this has been going on for years, for more than a decade. This was just the last straw that broke the camel's back.
And my understanding is that a very large portion of the Iranian population is quite young, like under 30 is makes up a
Mhm.
very large portion of the Iranian population. First of all, do you think that that has something to do with this pushback, a generational change in thought on this stuff? And secondarily, you mentioned some stories of teenagers. I was hoping you could share those.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, first of all, yeah, you're 100% right. Vast majority of Iran's population are under 30 by like Honestly, a few years ago, I remember it was like 70%. I think now it's like 60%. I know for sure about 40% of Iran's population are under the age of 25. So I'm 26. So the vast, all these protesters that are going out in the streets are either like around my age or way younger. And I myself lived in Iran until I was 13. So when I think of these people getting shot, getting beaten up every day, when I see these videos, I think of my schoolmates, I think of my neighbors. And every time I see that, literally, I feel like a big part of my heart gets ripped apart.
Yeah.
And this would be like the perfect time to talk about those teenagers because, like, literally this morning I saw the news and I was crying. So, two big news came out. Yesterday, the ongoing news, I would say, of 16-year-old Nika Shakarami. Nika, on September 20th, when she went to the protest, she went missing. Her family started posting online looking for her, and they just didn't have, they were looking for authorities, looking at hospitals, they couldn't find her. After 10 days, sorry, on September 21st, she went missing. So after 10 days, on September 30th, the authorities delivered her body to her family, and she had bruises all over her body, fractured skull, broken nose, and today documents got leaked that her cause of death was repeated blunt forces to her head. I mean that seems obvious, but I will get to that in a second, because uh, a few days ago on October 2nd was Nika's funeral, and October 2nd was actually also her 17th birthday.
Mm.
So during the funeral, a lot of protesters showed up as well because out of solidarity for the family, and that also caused the authorities to also show up to her funeral. There's a video of her mother screaming, "Today I should have been celebrating your birthday, but I'm celebrating your martyrdom." And so the authorities showed up. They first of all arrested Nika's uncle, then Nika's aunt, Atash Shokarmi. Atash had also been posting on Twitter updates about Nika. And yesterday they announced the family basically said that the authorities are threatening them that if the family doesn't go on television and make a false confession that Nika's death had nothing to do with the protests, they will kill Nika's aunt and uncle. So that news came out yesterday, and then news of the leaked documents that prove that Nika was killed, obviously by these blunt force traumas, repeated force traumas to her body. Um, so that's been going on. Nika's uncle and aunt are still under arrest. And then today, another news came out. I'm gonna look up her name for a second. It was for a 16-year-old who had died last week. Her name is Sarina Ismailzadeh. She was 16, and yesterday her mother committed suicide because she just couldn't bear the pain of losing, obviously, her 16-year-old daughter. And that kind of broke me this morning. But the thing is, it's not just them two either. There's been like more than a dozen that I know that I've posted about with their names and their faces on my Twitter. And again, like the ones that we know of are only a fraction of the real numbers. So honestly, that's been like really getting at me, to be honest.
Yeah, it's absolutely devastating. I mean, it's devastating when anybody dies, let alone a bunch of teenagers. I mean, it's absolutely devastating. Amnesty International says that at least 1,000, I'm sure that number's low, have been arrested, and that quite a few of those are journalists. Can you talk a
Mhm.
little bit about the sort of oppression of getting this stuff out there, and how they're trying to control the narrative?
Absolutely. Yeah. So that has been going on again for decades. That's just a pillar of the Islamic Republic. There are no journalists who can live inside Iran and criticize the government. I will get to the recent news in a second, but I have personal experience with that. My father and my brother were both journalists. My father used to work for a political magazine in Iran, and every day after soccer practice, he would take me to his work, to finish the rest of his work days. And I met his editor. Like I knew him. He was a really nice man. I used to meet him every week. His name is Kayvan Samimi. Kayvan had, like I said, he was like, honestly the kindest man, one of the kindest men I've known. But K1 had like a nervous tick, right? Every 5 seconds, his like right shoulder would jump up, and he got
Mm.
that nervous tick because under Shah's regime, the previous regime, he was imprisoned for writing against Shahs, and he was tortured in prison. So then the 2009 election happened, the Green Movement happened, and K1 got arrested again by the current regime. And he's still in prison. So it's been more than a decade. K1 has been
Oh.
in prison. And it wasn't even for the magazine anymore. He only had a website that he was covering these protests. And there have been so many international calls to release him because he's literally dying now. He's an old man and he's been like rotting away in prison. So that's been a constant theme within the Islamic Republic. Now, with the current news, the journalist who broke the news of Mahsa Amini's death, her name is Nilufar Hamedi. She was arrested for just breaking the news of Mahsa's death, and not only that, she was moved to solitary confinement. More so, Elahe Hamedi, sorry, my bad, Elahe Mohammedi, she covered Mahsa Amini's funeral. She's also been arrested. There have been organizers, activists who've organized these general strike throughout Iran who've been arrested as well as artists. There was a songwriter, Shervin Hajipur, who wrote a song for Mahsa. He got arrested. He got released on bail yesterday. And there was another poet, Mona Bourzoui, who also got arrested for releasing a poem of her, basically. Another journalist that I know was arrested was Mona Road. She got arrested because she posted a picture of herself eating breakfast at a restaurant without her hijab. And Mona Rod's location is still unknown.
My God. Speaking of the journalism aspect, you just either earlier today or yesterday put out a little thread that I thought was really important about where people get their information on this stuff from. You
Mhm.
pointed out that a lot of the information is coming from either state sources that are quite obsequious to the Islamic Republic, or Western sources that have their own sort of perverse incentive to exploit the turmoil for geopolitical ends. And
Mhm.
you pointed out we really should be listening to independent journalists in the region
Mhm.
to get our information. Can you just expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's been my biggest struggle for the past 2 weeks within the leftist circles because I'm only covering like what I'm doing. I'm not putting my own view even on these. The only thing I'm doing is uh, getting the news from the sources on the ground in Iran and just translating them and putting them on my Twitter.
Hmm.
That's how it should be. However, uh, that unfortunately that's not it. So first of all, let me tell you, nobody is confused how fucked up the propaganda within the Western countries are. We have
Yeah.
corporate propaganda, and we have state propaganda. Both of which should be opposed. However, the way the alternative to that propaganda should not be foreign state media propaganda. For example, right? I'm not going to, if I want to learn about the corruption within the royal family, I'm not going to go to the BBC, right?
Yeah.
They're never going to cover that. Same way, in the same way, Press TV is never going to cover the events inside Iran fairly. Not only that, but allies of Iranian government, like Russia and China. So RT, CCTV, CGTN, they are not going to, because they're allies of Khamenei, they are never going to cover the event of Iran fairly. That doesn't mean you should never listen to them. I listen to them. Like our Russian and Chinese news networks cover the corruption within the American government fairly, right?
Hmm.
But they are not going to cover the corruption inside their own country or inside the countries of their allies fairly. So
Hmm.
the alternative to Western propaganda should either be independent news networks, or if you are going in the route of listening to Press TV or Russian or Chinese owned state media, at least have the nuance to pick and choose what you're listening to them. You should be able to like realize in the sense that the Voice of America is not going to cover the corruption of Biden administration or Trump administration. Press TV, CGTN, or RT are never going to cover the news of inside Iran in the same way. So I get a lot of. I'm not going to name names because also another one of my big problem is these personalities become larger than the news. So
Yeah.
people kind of follow these journalists as like cult leaders, and whatever they say is true. And honestly, I didn't even know that about a couple of these journalists where they work for. So it takes like 5 minutes of research. I saw
Yeah.
one of them call this grassroots revolution, color revolution. So okay, I'm gonna go to Twitter. His Twitter says he worked for CGTN, which is literally owned by the Chinese government. So
Hmm.
I'm like, okay, perfect. That makes perfect sense. He's not allowed to
Hmm.
cover the news inside Iran fairly. What I'm not going to do is just retweet that at the people, at Iranian people, and be like, you know what? I'm an American man, but I know more about your country than you do. Here's my source. This guy who works for the Chinese government. That nuance is not too complicated, but for some reason, it's so lost within the leftist circles.
Yeah. And I've also seen a lot of narratives about I think, like you said, it's obvious that there are actors in the West that are happy to exploit anything like this to their own geopolitical end. And I think some
Mhm.
people can't separate that from what's going on in Iran. So it seems like on the left, you either have to say the coups and the meddling was bad, or these protests are valid and virtuous, but you somehow can't say both. And I just
Right.
really don't understand why people can't hold those two ideas in their head. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I also don't understand why they can't hold that in their head. But I saw another tweet from, I forgot his ad, but his name is K1. He's also an Iranian on Twitter, and he was talking about how difficult it is to be an Iranian leftist because if you say anything against the current regime, American leftists are going to come at you, and if you say anything, or like monarchs are going to come at you from who support the previous Iranian regime. So it's that nuance is completely lost. But there absolutely are bad actors, and there always will be bad actors trying to take advantage of any movement. There are
Yeah.
bad actors within the Black Lives Matter movement. That doesn't nullify the whole movement as a whole.
Yes.
So to go to specifics, one name I will mention who's a controversial figure, her name is Mahsa Amini, right? She also went on Bill Maher. She supports like hard sanctions against Iran. She's also like Iranian American. But again, I do 5 minutes of research. I go to her Twitter. I see she's worked for Voice of America. I see she has ties to the American government. She's literally getting paid by the American government. And that's the end of it for me. What I don't do is say, oh, look, this one person represents the entire 85 million people inside Iran. That is so absurd. That doesn't happen within anywhere else within the leftist community inside America. So, like for example, if Biden just goes and says, uh, I don't know, healthcare is a human right, that doesn't mean the whole Medicare for all movement is corrupt. You know,
Right.
but I will say this as well because I think there is an underlying deep-rooted racism in that
Hmm.
because people in Western countries, their minds have also like westernized and colonized. They can't even imagine that people in third world countries in the Middle East can organize together and have an uprising this big. So there
Hmm.
must be Western hands behind it. That just must be it because Middle Easterns are not capable of such thing.
Hmm.
Even though if they do a little bit of research, they'll see that this current movement didn't just start this month or the past month. It's been ongoing for years. And these leftists claim to be pro-workers. Where were they supporting the Iranian workers who've been on strike for like more than a year now?
Hmm.
So just because you heard the news today, it doesn't mean it happened today.
Yeah. And another element of this that has confused me with leftists and Middle East rhetoric, really in general, is to my like I think progressives and leftists should pretty staunchly oppose theocracy,
Mhm.
whether an individual is themselves religious or not. The idea of imposing it upon the population seems to me to be the antithesis of progressivism, and yet there often seems to be a reflexive defense of it simply because they are an enemy of a Western state or what have you. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's again, that should be simple, but unfortunately it isn't. So Iranian people are not asking for US intervention. Nobody in Iran is confused about how their current situation was driven from the 1953 CIA coup, right?
Yeah.
However, they can also oppose the current theocracy. Two things can be wrong at once, and
Hmm.
there is a lot that Iranian people are suffering from that isn't directly the US's fault, right? The CIA did not start a morality police. The CIA did not mandate the hijab law. The CIA is not executing gay people inside Iran. All of that is because of the current regime. And Iranian people can oppose those things without having been labeled a color revolution. And
Mm-hmm.
that's another thing. Like the LGBT issue in third world countries gets so lost, but they are like last year they hung two gay teenagers in Iran. And again, not a peep from leftist circles because you know why? Just because Khamenei goes on TV and says death to America, and that's based. And all these leftist ideas have become so simple, so one-dimensional, and they've just become
Mm-hmm.
like buzzwords, like based. You know, that's based. Everything's based. It feels like leftists are just going to meme their way into a revolution. So when they see a real revolution happening, they don't even recognize it. That's what's happening here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've bought into the false dichotomies in so many different ways, right? We make other states good if they happen to be an enemy of the United States. Do you have any advice for viewers that might be interested in trying to help Iranians here? Is there anything that viewers can do to, to assist the people that are struggling and protesting right now?
Yeah, so the easiest thing to do would be to talk about them. I see and I get messages from inside Iran saying how the fact that the world is talking about them is motivating them to keep out and keep doing this. More specifically, because the Iranian government keeps shutting down the internet.
Hmm.
Because at first, just to stop people from, sharing videos of their police brutality inside Iran, but also it's a psychological tactic because they want to make Iranian protesters feel alone. And in 2009, that's kind of what happened. The movement kind of fizzled out slowly and slowly. It doesn't look like this time. Like it doesn't look like it this time because especially they are way more organized. In 2009, they didn't have a general strike movement. Now they do. In 2009, there weren't this many students getting involved, but now they are, and more like very specifically because they see the world keeps talking about them. Other ways you can help is by pressuring your governments to lift the sanctions on Iran
Hmm.
instead of. So actually, a couple of days ago, Biden announced more sanctions on Iran, and
Yeah.
so did Trudeau. But the I mean, it's not an issue. It is not up for debate that sanctions only hurts the people. More
Hmm.
specifically, because like yourself, people keep asking me, how can I help? Especially with the general strike going on, what could really help them would be a way to send them money, like via Venmo, Cash App, or PayPal, or anything like that. But all of that are not working in Iran because of Western sanctions. And they are not even making an exceptions in this case. Even though they talk about supporting the protesters, they are not doing anything about it. They are putting more further sanctions on it, especially in Canada. So Canada has been a safe haven for the Ayatollahs' families and the Revolutionary Guards families and the morality police families for years, right? And the
Hmm.
way they get inside Canada is by a thing called SUV, which is startup visa. And in order to get that visa, they have to pay or they have to prove to the Canadian government that their business ideas can provide $200,000 at least for Canada. So Mushtaba Khamenei, he's Ayatollah Khamenei's son. He has a Canadian visa. The daughter of the former chief of morality police is currently in Canada, not wearing a hijab and living freely. And so have so many other ayatollahs, so many other Revolutionary Guard members. And Canada apparently doesn't have any sanctions for these ayatollahs. They keep saying the sanctions only apply to the people in power, but they are literally welcoming the people in power inside Iran, and they are living in like literally luxury, in like luxury villas in Canada. But they don't make any exceptions to help the protesters inside Iran. So you can pressure your government to lift up those sanctions and do actual viable things that will help the protesters inside Iran. What doesn't help the protesters inside Iran is this constant enabling and empowering of the current regime. So Western governments have been enabling the current regime by legitimizing them, by continuing to make deals with them on nuclear and on oil. In March of this year, actually, the UN put the Islamic Republic under Women's Rights Commission. Like, how is that? Yeah, exactly. How is that not 100% legitimizing what the morality police is doing to women? So, governments keep legitimizing and empowering the current regime, and they keep sanctioning the people.
That's utterly insane. And the last thing I wanted to ask you, Mo, is I have so few people that I trust on this stuff. I basically I see your stuff on Twitter, and I saw Rod and a few others.
Mhm.
Can you just share with the audience maybe some good sources that they could turn to?
Yeah, I mean, I gotta check my phone real quick. Popular Front is a good independent media that's just like a lot of people do, just shares the underground sources within Iran. Um, there is another guy who's also really good at sharing the news. Afshin Ismaili, he's also really good at that. Asal Rod is really great. She also has a lot of like great nuanced takes. Zainab Day, she's also great. But the only way you can get through to the real news is just by listening to the people inside Iran. Look up
Yeah,
who's posting the news that you're finding under these hashtags and under these trends, under these trends, basically. Um, and if you see somebody calling for sanctions, more sanctions on the Iranian people, and they claim to be an Iranian activist, I, I don't trust them. Up to you if you want to trust them. But that doesn't nullify like just them sharing the videos of the protests inside Iran, right? So Masih Alinejad, for example, like I said, I don't trust her for a second, but she does just share a lot of the video. Oh, another thing about her, she actually, well, two things. In the Middle East area, there have also been a lot of protests in solidarity inside Iran. However, Messi misrepresented a protest that was happening in Afghanistan, that they were protesting like a Taliban bombing as, oh, they are protesting in solidarity for Iranian women. So take these things
hmm
and do like 5 seconds of research,
hmm
but don't uh, don't point at one thing and say this one thing represents the whole movement. There's a lot of great videos, like I said, Afshin Ismaili, Asal Rad, Zainab Day, Popular Front, it covers a lot of good news, not just about Iran, but about the whole region. And they cover them without any affiliation, which is how it should be, because
Yeah.
they don't have anything to gain, they don't have anything to lose for covering these protests.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you guys have seen Mo's Twitter handle there up on the screen. I really encourage everybody to go give Mo a follow. Thank you so much for taking the time today.
Thank you, Luke. Really appreciate you.